The film opens with a young woman named Laura. She seems to be backpacking with her father and jumps over a fence. Sadly, termites victimize the wall she jumped on, so as its metal wires are rusted, Laura throws her backpack to the other side and jumps over it. She appears to be extremely exhausted on her voyage with her father, Wilson. Both Wilson and Laura walk through an open field toward a shabby cottage. As they make their way through the field, Laura brushes her hands on the green grass as she looks very eager to enter that cottage. They are both shivering in this chilly weather, so they zip up their jackets to feel warmer. Strictly following Wilson's lead, Laura walks in concentration while carrying her backpack with her. They enter the lawn of the cottage and notice some shades and benches. They put their backpacks down to get an opportunity to catch their breath. Laura, being the curious one, walks around the area and investigates the side of the house. She notices the old shabby paint on the house, a window that is nailed shut, and spider webs. This leads her to guess that this house has been abandoned for quite a long while, as even vegetation has begun to grow on some of the walls. Laura finds a vacant window and tries her best to peep inside, but all she can see is pitch black darkness. Wilson seeks her out and brings her out front as a pickup truck is pulling up by the driveway. It is the owner of the house who wants Wilson and Laura to renovate this old decaying mess of a home. Wilson and the house owner discuss some matters about the house. The owner intends to bring them some food later. His discussion with Wilson insinuates that their ultimate motive is to prepare this house for sale, since this house is aging every day. Plus, it is in a very remote location in Uruguay, which makes its maintenance extremely difficult. All three of them make their way inside the house and the house owner turns on a lamp. He pulls a torch out of his pocket as the house does not have electricity. Wilson and Laura will have to manage with some candles and lanterns for now. Wilson estimates that it will take him and Laura 1 or 2 days if the weather works in their favor to fix the house. The owner of the house shows Wilson a door that'll easily lead them to the front if the need arises. The owner already has a buyer lined up and negotiations are going on at the moment, so they'll need to work efficiently. Laura lights some candles to illuminate her surroundings and takes a lantern in her hand to investigate everything. She is deeply fascinated by this house and examines the staircase, which is inhabited by termites. Then, she enters a very dark room which is enlightened by the dim glare of her lantern. As she slowly settles her vision to look across the room, she notices an old telephone, bones, books, manuscripts, and a lot of things that look like they belong in a museum. Wilson and Laura gather in what seems to be the living room of the house. They lay off all their supplies at the old table that is placed in the center of the dusty sofa. Wilson props down on one of the sofas and lights up a cigarette. Meanwhile, Laura heads to the washroom to freshen up. She takes off her jacket and t-shirt and changes into a tank top instead. Wilson and Laura take out a radio from their backpack. They start playing songs on it to make themselves more productive, as music helps to keep them energized throughout the entire day. As the day passes by, both of them get exhausted and cold, so they agree to finally take a nap. Wilson dozes off, but Laura cannot sleep. She goes through a book of Polaroids that she found in the house. She inspects the strange images of a sofa inside it, which is the same one Wilson is sleeping on. She hears some clutter from the wood boards nailed into one of the windows. Laura is confused because the culprit is invisible and all she understands is that she heard the sound. Slightly scared, Laura quickly rushes to wake Wilson up from his sleep, but he ignores his daughter and accuses her of being overly superstitious. He strictly orders her to sleep and rest, as she will certainly need her energy later that day. Defeated, Laura goes back to her chair and pulls up her blanket. She tries not to think about the sounds too much, but she is in for more, as a minute or two later, she hears a thudding sound from the first floor. It is so powerful that it leads to some debris falling from the ceiling. This is enough to remove Laura's doubts because her fears appear to be a reality now. She again awakens Wilson from his sleep and urges him to go check upstairs. Wilson annoyingly gets out of his sleeping spot and heads upstairs. Laura cautiously listens to his footsteps as he makes his way up to the first floor and across the hall. Laura lets out a panicked gasp when she hears Wilson's scream and a thud, which implies that he probably got hit. Sweat drips down Laura's forehead as she anxiously cries for her father. She is still holding a lantern in her hand to combat the impending darkness of the house, and her head is tilted upwards. She nervously calls out for her father, but the everlasting silence causes her to lose her cool. She breaks into desperate sobs under the apprehension of what his father might have faced on the first floor. She regrets sending him there now, and crouches down to the floor, turning her lantern off. A swish and clang of a sharp blade pierces through the air, followed by Laura's scream. She runs off from her spot on the floor to the other side of the room, fleeing from something she can't see or comprehend. The door and shut windows rattle violently as if someone is knocking on them, trying to breach their barriers. Laura frantically runs from one point of the house to another, attempting to find an exit path out of this house of horrors. She tries one door after the other, but they all appear to be jammed, denying her the opportunity to escape this cursed house. Laura peers out into the corridor towards the bottom of the staircase. She inches slowly towards it, probably under the paranoia that someone might leap at her from a corner. Her dark silhouette finally gets to the door frame and she pops her head out to gaze up to the staircase. She musters her courage to proceed forward when her sight falls upon a shiny object lying on the floor. Right before the staircase is a ring which she picks up in her hands. She clutches it tightly, not wanting to let go because it belonged to her father. She wonders what might have happened to him and the inside her elevate. With heavy breaths and a trembling body, she looks at the staircase one last time before she senses movement behind her. She gets off the ground and moves toward the door behind her, which looks slightly ajar. She remembers the supplies she and Wilson initially brought to the house and opens her bag. Laura pulls a large dagger out of the bag, but it doesn't feel right in her hand. So she scours the bag some more and selects a pointed sickle as her choice of weapon for self-defense. This gives her the courage to push the mysterious door open regardless of her fear. She stumbles onto a lantern placed on the floor on the other side of the door. Laura picks the lantern up hastily and turns around to another jump scare. Wilson's unconscious and heavy body topples her over, and she lets out a cry loud enough to awaken the deceased. She bends down to view that there is blood gushing out of Wilson's mouth, which has stained most of his shirt too. She gently places her fingers under his chin to check for his pulse when she notices that his hands are tied. She addresses him and moves his body in a futile effort to bring him back. She has no understanding of what they walked into or what is happening to her right now. She rests her head on his chest to listen to his non-existent heartbeat and get some solace from the lifeless body of her one and only loved one. Laura can't stop sniffling when she searches his body. She frantically empties his pockets and looks around their stuff to search for anything that might enable her to get some help. She tries on the telephone lying on one of the tables too, but it's been ages since it was disconnected. She picks up the sickle back again that she dropped beside Wilson's body earlier. Some of Wilson's blood is also smeared across her chest and clothes at this point, and she looks really disheveled. She walks out of the living room and steps into a hall, shutting the door behind her. To clearly navigate through the dark hallway, she lowers the lantern closer to the ground to view what she's walking on. After crossing what seems like the longest and hardest journey of her life, Laura enters the rotten old kitchen of the house. She tries to turn the doorknob of the door leading outside with full force, but it doesn't budge. She tries to break the door open, but at one point, she pauses. This change in her course of action is in response to the clutter of pans she heard behind her back. This is unnerving for her because she is very well aware that there is no one else in the house besides her. Continuing to walk pushes her into another room of the house which has equally ancient furniture, only comprising of different items than the stuff she saw in other rooms. There's a dirty old mirror attached to a dresser under which lies whatever it is that possibly caused the commotion. She prods it around with her sickle before moving on to the utensils and other trash lying around in the kitchen. Catching on to something fluttering around the room, she follows her instinct, which leads her to a cabinet filled with stuff. Bracing herself, she moves the cans around with her sickle and some pigeons fly out into her face. Laura didn't see that one coming and runs to another door. She pushes it open and jumps back to avoid any danger, but it appears to be empty like the rest of the house. She swings the door open properly this time and realizes that she has returned to the living room where she left Wilson. But what's strange is that there are blood stains on the floor, but Wilson's body is nowhere to be seen in its old spot. Rather, it is perched upon the sofa he slept in hours ago and the one Laura saw in the photograph. Wilson's mouth is widely cut and he is propped up on the sofa with a stuffed doll in his hand. It looks like someone properly placed him there, waiting to surprise Laura. She is seriously creeped out, so she pushes a heavy piece of furniture to the door frame to create a barricade. She doesn't whoever made her father sit on the sofa in such a twisted manner get inside. With a heavy cabinet now blocking the entry to the living room, Laura ties her hair up tightly in an attempt to collect herself. She is done being scared now and is in survival mode to fight for her life. All her senses are heightened and there are whimpers rising up her throat. Nevertheless, Laura tries to ignore the music seeping through the floorboards of the first floor down to her in the living room. It is a creepy song that sounds upbeat on a superficial level but does not seem appropriate at all for the current situation she is in. It is like an old children's nursery rhyme that gets louder the closer she walks to it. Laura finds herself leaving the living room again. She grips the sickle in her hand tightly before she takes her first step onto the doomed staircase. The music penetrates her ears more and more as she climbs up the staircase and makes her way to the first floor of the house. It is just as dark as the rest of the house, if not more. The music is coming out from a room the door of which is half closed. Laura peeks through the crevice but doesn't see anything. But she has to find the source of this spooky music and stop it nevertheless, so she pushes the door open. Instantly taking a step back to protect herself from any potential harm, she exerts force again and can see the whole room now. It is a small and bleak room with an old hand mirror put on top of a table. The reflection of that mirror shows Laura finally locating the radio which is blaring the music. She places her lantern on one of the tables and uses its light to turn the radio's dials to switch it off. The music abruptly stops after some distortion and Laura takes a sigh of relief. She surveys the room that has a few couches lying around and a box full of old stuff with its lid open. Cobwebs have formed around the box as it has stayed open all these years in the same spot. There are old photo frames arranged on top of mantels and storage boxes piled below them. But it is one strange and intriguing object in particular that catches her attention. A Polaroid camera of old times sits amidst all this mess with its lens conveniently pointed in her direction. Laura picks it up and accidentally presses a button which releases a blinding flash in her eyes. The camera drops to the floor after taking her picture and the Polaroid begins to gradually slide out of it. As Laura shines her lantern on it, the picture develops into an image of a close-up of Laura's face with a mysterious girl standing behind her. The girl can be seen wearing a white nightgown standing a few feet behind her with Laura's back facing her. Laura is in shock after viewing the Polaroid when objects fall behind her. She swiftly turns around and follows the sound to get out of the room. The light from the lantern in her hand allows her to see the blood marks on the walls, which probably came from Wilson being dragged after getting attacked. He must have held onto the walls to resist, but it didn't work in the end. Laura goes to another room which has huge pieces of furniture covered in white sheets. Among all this is a huge canvas also covered like the other objects in the room. Besides it is a table with numerous paintbrushes lying on it. Laura removes the white sheet from the canvas to see what's underneath it. There is an unfinished painting left behind on the canvas of a man sitting in a wooden chair wearing glasses. His facial features have not been painted yet, and probably won't, considering this house was abandoned a long time ago. Laura moves to her left to inspect another canvas which is also covered. She courageously takes off its white cloth and unveils an intricate painting. The picture painted on the canvas is highly detailed. It shows a scene of old times as most of the shades on it are brown and blackish. Laura can see several men with top hats, women in old flowy dresses, and children in suits all sitting together to pose for a painting or a picture. Laura looks at their faces one after the other but doesn't find any of them familiar. The next canvas has a solo portrait of a little girl with brown hair sitting in the large frame of a wooden chair. Just like the man in the first painting, her body and hair are painted but her facial features are missing as well. The girl is resting her hands on the arms of the chair and has her legs crossed with grace like a ballerina. Laura moves past pots and bottles of paint and ink to quickly shut the door that seems to have opened itself. A small light shines behind Laura and she feels as if someone is coming to get her. She crouches on the floor, crossing underneath the tables with brushes, and hides behind it. She seeks refuge in this dark corner by resting her back on the wall and putting out the lantern in her hand to be undetectable. She presses both her palms on her mouth to suppress any sound from coming out because the assailant has arrived. She can see the shoes of a man holding a lantern as they walk inside the room. She barely holds in her scream when he drops one of his arms low to reveal the huge knife in his hand. The man checks the whole room and Laura finally breathes when she hears him leave, shutting the door behind him. She turns her lantern back on and crawls out from under the table. She continues crawling on all fours instead of fully getting up. Her sight falls upon a key lying on the carpet that she takes in her hand. This is when the hand of a man grabs her throat from behind and she screams excruciatingly. She waves the sickle around to defend herself, but there is no one else in the room besides her. She makes a run for it and exits the room. She doesn't stop until she has come all the way downstairs back to the living room where she last left her father behind. She screams for her father one last time before inserting the key just found in the keyhole to the main door. She glances back to the living room over and over again to see if someone is coming or even if her father is miraculously fine. But none of that happens and fate finally works in her favor. The key successfully unlocks the door which leads her to the front of the house. Laura frantically dashes out of the house and steps into the moonlight. She keeps running from her unseen attacker into the woods, crossing across many barren trees. She finally falls under one of those trees in the bushes, struggling to catch her breath. She hides from one tree to another, whimpering and shivering like a powerless and vulnerable prey. She resorts to crawling on the forest floor like a helpless child, moving across the dead leaves and foliage like a rat. She stands and runs when she regains some of her energy and keeps sprinting down a little stream of water that she found in the woods. This ultimately leads her to a small road paved in the middle of the woods. She stands there trying to make sense of her whereabouts or if she is safe anymore or not. She does a 180 turn to see tall trees and wild vegetation as far as the eye can see. The camera shows the same lifeless little girl in a white dress standing ominously behind her in an ungodly halo. Laura feels her heart drop when she turns around to see it right in front of her eyes. Her vision is interrupted by the loud honk of a car behind her. The owner of the house almost hit her with his truck and halted just in time for her to touch its trunk. She anxiously opens the door to the truck and gets inside, immediately hugging her savior. She cries and can't let go of him because she is scared that something worse might still happen. He wants to know what happened which led to this, but she can't even get her words out straight. He shuts the door to the truck and starts driving to the house. However, Laura gets in the way and begs him to stop because it's too risky to go back there. She doesn't want anyone to go into that devil's den and pleads to him to stay here. He gently touches her face, trying to get some information about what happened to her father or where he is. He drives to the house despite her insistence on not doing so. She just seems overwhelmed to him, so he wants to let her know that there's no one inside the house and they should get Wilson back. He enters the house with a flashlight in his hand while Laura stays back inside the truck, refusing to step foot there ever again. He scans the room once before convincing Laura to accompany him inside, because it is not safe to leave her out in the woods all alone. Once inside, he moves the cupboard back to its place and goes through the door to look for any intruders. Once he's returned, Laura leads him to the first floor where Wilson fell off from. She revisits the room upstairs with him and sees the camera perched on top of some books now, facing them again. A sound behind her, and the owner is nowhere to be found. Laura finds the stuffed doll she saw in Wilson's hand on the floor and a door shuts in her face. She knocks the door repeatedly in panic and slams the lantern to switch it back on. She hears the camera make a sound as another photograph comes out of it. The flash from the camera illuminates the room for a second and she sees the ghost of the little girl staring back at her. Another flash after prolonged darkness reveals the slasher coming at her with his knife. Flashes continue to light up the room and she emerges from there covered in blood. The owner's flashlight lies on the floor with no traces of him yet. She continues crying when a baby's mobile starts moving with a tune playing. There is a pram underneath it which contains numerous old Polaroids of the owner of the house with someone who looks like his pregnant wife. Laura finds another room in the house which has plastic sheets hanging from the ceiling. There is a bed in the corner and the host of the little girl runs behind her. There is a rosary with a cross hanging from the rod of the bed that she wraps around her hand. She stumbles upon a collection of Polaroids glued to the wall behind the bed, showing all the women the owner brought back to the house and photographed without their consent during compromising moments. She sees her pictures with the owner too. And later, she sees his bloody body lying on the floor with his hands tied. The next course of events makes everything crystal clear. Wilson and the owner of the house, Nesto, were both corrupt men. This house was their place for bringing many women and partying with. Laura, even though was Wilson's daughter, was one of those unfortunate women. She and Nesto fell in love and she got pregnant. But Wilson and Nesto coerced her to eliminate, which snapped something inside her and drove her into mania, which we all have been witnessing all this time. So she is ultimately the one who slayed both these men. And now she plays with the ghost of her unborn daughter.